Okay, welcome everybody. It's June 18th, 2026, and we're going to have a Satsang today. Should be a fun one. Um, we're doing two things today. One is the Annihilation of You from the Pointers to Nisargadatta Maharaj, which is an interesting. It's short, but it's very interesting, and we'll talk our way through that. And then I've got a piece called The Ordinary and Normal, which has a couple of fun stories in it. So we'll go through that. So, the annihilation of you. Addressing the visitors one morning, Maharaj said, "Some of you have been coming here for many weeks. I'm particularly concerned about the overseas visitors who come here only to meet me and not for sightseeing. They have to spend a lot of money on traveling and stay in Bombay, and I sometimes wonder if they really understand what I am trying to convey. Now tell me, you know what Pramartha is, the sublime truth, the ultimate meaning of life. What is this ultimate meaning for each of you? Think over what I've been talking about before you answer." One bold answer from a foreign visitor was liberation. I want to be liberated from the bondage of this life. Having heard you, I would now call it the bondage of consciousness. Soon there were confirmatory murmurs from several others. Maharaj laughed and said, "Look how strong the conditioning can be. Whether the conditioning is from the parents or from the spiritual guides is not relevant. The problem of bondage and liberation is part of the traditional teaching given to those whose intellectual and intuitive level is not high enough to grasp the true essence of that which is." Yeah, he kind of went right to the point. So recognize that what he's saying, when you look at how the spiritual traditions stack up, 90% of those spiritual traditions are movement within ego, right? So that's how they deal with everything. When I used to teach executive leadership, uh, leadership development is a movement in ego, right? It's a how do I mature within the ego model. So when he's saying that, he's saying the problem of bondage and liberation is part of the traditional teaching that is given to those whose intellectual and intuitive level is not high enough to grasp the true essence of that which is. And what you find in Advaita is kind of two things most of the time. One of them is the recognition that when you've been in that kind of an arc, that there must be something more. There's an intuition that kicks in and says, "Wait a minute, I think there might be something beyond ego." Or something. Now there's 100 ways to say that, whatever it is, that whatever verbal version might have driven you. But that's what draws us all here, is that intuition internally that says, "Hey, there's something more than simply working with the ego movement along some line of development." Right? So so that's all he's talking about. So and most folks are happy, believe it or not, to feel secure within the traditional teachings, right? They're like, "Okay, that this looks like the right thing. I'm comfortable with it." It's the intuition that starts to bark at you, that moves people typically out of whatever traditional movements they've been in into something beyond that. So so he says to these guys, he says, "But you're not kindergarten students of spirituality. I keep telling you that you must cease to think and speak as if you were phenomenal objects. I've been telling you that you are not phenomenal objects, but consciousness itself, the animating consciousness which provides sentience to the sentient being." So when I talk about how the I am is the universal consciousness, and the I am fill in the blank is the individual consciousness, that's what he's talking about, which provides sentience to the sentience being. When you look at yourself and say, "I am the sentient being," right? That's just the extrusion. In other words, it's like a cookie maker. Consciousness is getting extruded into the body mind, and that is what's taken to be the whole of who you are, not the universal consciousness that you really are, right? So think about that for a minute. If you do that, there is likely to arise a sense of bondage, because now you have consciousness acting as though it's contained. And when any energy is contained, it's usually going to object, right? The energy is going to say, I want out. So when somebody is verbalizing, I want out of bondage, they're simply verbalizing, oh, I took this body of mine to be who I am. And there's a sense here that tells me that the energy that I am is bigger than this body mind. If again, however you say it. But there's some intuition that says this is not the end of the road. Right? Further, that you are consciousness only in manifestation, but truly you are that which is prior to consciousness itself, i.e., you are pure awareness. So that's what he's saying to them. He's saying, okay, so I want you to tell me what's your ultimate truth. The pramartha is what he was asking for. And that was why he said, he laughed and he says, look how strong the conditioning is, because when you responded to me, what you were concerned about was the bondage of the misidentified version of who you are. He says, it is not simple enough to understand, Maharaj asked, that a mere object and appearance, which is all that the physical body is, cannot possibly perform any action whatsoever as an independent entity. It is only when impersonal consciousness in its total functioning manifests by objectifying itself and becomes identified with each object that the concept of the personal I comes into being. So that's how that happens. The concept is the source of bondage, the objectivizing of the I, the pure subjectivity into an objective me. It is this me. The I concept, or the ego, which is imaginary bondage from which liberation is sought. Now notice imaginary bondage. A clear perception of what constitutes the sentient being that is seeking liberation will show you how ludicrous this whole idea is. This is fun. We're going to go to the meat bucket here again. All right. The body itself is nothing but the growth of the male sperm, which gets fertilized in the female womb. The fetus is the essence of food consumed by the parents, and in it, consciousness is latent. In other words, it hasn't arrived yet. But the body mind is ready for that arrival. If it is now clear that what we appear to be is nothing but the essence of food, in other words, if you've misidentified yourself and you think you're the body mind, may I ask, said Maharaj, which particular grain of food do you want to liberate? Which particular grain of food, or which of the five elements, food being the essence of the combination of the five elements, are you identifying yourself with? So he's pointing out the foolishness of thinking that the body mind itself, which you've identified yourself to be, is in some way, shape, or form subject to liberation. This is a different way of looking at it, right? He says, awakening or enlightenment or liberation is nothing, absolutely nothing other than apperceiving profoundly, deeply, intuitively what we are, that which is here now. Right? So he mentioned, remember earlier, he said that their level is not high enough, right? The ones that are in the traditional paths to grasp the true essence of that which is. Right? That which is that you are the universal consciousness. So now here he is. Awakening or enlightenment or liberation is nothing, absolutely nothing other than apperceiving profoundly, deeply, intuitively what we are, that which is here now, is the absolute absence of whatever is imaginable or cognizable. Right? So the universal consciousness that you are is the absence of anything that can be conceived by the body mind, which is the same as the absolute presence of the unknowable potentiality. The universal I is simply unknowable potentiality before it has been triggered, through a body mind into being something. And I actually trigger it into everything on earth. I mean, you can, all there is consciousness. So I mean, we can, that's a conversation for a different day. He says, just think for a moment. Can a question arise which does not have at its center a you or me as an individual? Great question. Whenever you ask a question, right, if you dig deep enough, I think you'll find out that it's about you as an individual. That's what questions serve to support. Seeing or not seeing, understanding or not understanding, doing or not doing, it is always a me that is concerned. Hardly ever is the thing seen or the matter understood or the act that happens. Wherever there is paravriti, a complete and total change over, a metanoesis has happened. The changeover has not been done or achieved by any entity of its own volition. If it is this fact that is not realized, in other words, we assume that the doings that happen are doings by us. Indeed, it is the apperception of such, as such, not by any individual, of this very fact that brings about the essential annihilation of you. Now, I want to stop here for a minute because this is a part that gets really, really confusing in a lot of spiritual teachings when people talk about the annihilation of the ego, right? So and they go, wait a minute, I can feel me. What do you mean this is going to be annihilated, right? Well, presence is not what we're talking about, right? Presence is not presence is simply consciousness. The I am, right, is simply presence, right? And then once that presence is extruded, it's extruded into consciousness itself. And then there's a misunderstanding that conscious body mind is an ego. And it's the annihilation of that concept, that story. It's the story that gets annihilated. Now you need to understand that we have a real problem as human beings between story and the felt experience of story. Right? So most human beings believe they live in a story. If you ask them what's going on, they're going to describe the story. And their feelings, the presence that are creating this felt experience, they believe goes along with the story. So the story in their mind carries the energy. What they don't see is that the misperception of who they are is simply painted on top. And the annihilation of that misperception does not obliterate the actual sense of being itself. That can't happen. That will never be annihilated. So when a master would say, put your ego right here, show it to me, and I will destroy it, he was talking about the concept of the ego, right? The story, but not the conflated sense that we carry around, that the story is the felt sense of who we are. The felt sense is, if you want to think of it, think of a reservoir of water as absolute awareness, and then it gets pumped into pipes, right? And as an individual, you are the pipes. The water's the same whether it's in the reservoir or it's in the pipes. The misapprehension or the misidentification is just you think that the body mind is who you are. So you're claiming the pipes and not the water. And when we say we're going to destroy the pipes, you go, holy shit, you're going to destroy the water, right? The water that cannot be destroyed, right? That will never be annihilated. But it's really good because it really gets people worried, as you know. They get very concerned that somehow or another they're going to be annihilated, and that certainly helps the ego move folks around any kind of spiritual uploading, for sure, if you think about it. Right. I can't tell you the discussions that we used to have, in the ashram about that, this annihilation of the ego. It's a big thing, right? All right. So It says this, it says the apperception as such, not by an individual. Now remember, apperception is simply perceiving without the perceiver. So witnessing is your first step into that, right? Your very first step. And so the minute you witness, I don't know, you can automatically feel that the energy is no longer all located within the individual. It's now located within the individual and also around the individual, right? That's the first step. That's the first step in witnessing. That's the first step into apperception. It actually is an apperception of a kind. It's just that typically in the beginning, it's not held. It basically collapses and we go back into the living as though we were the individual, right? So the apperception as such of this fact brings around the essential annihilation of you, the seeker, and achieves the sort of vacuum, a fasting of a mind, which invites the presence that is the real you. This is how the transformatory adjustment happens or comes about. It cannot be achieved. Right? Now, I want you to notice, because we're going to go on and talk a little bit about that, but he uses the term a sort of vacuum, a fasting of the mind. Right? And when we encounter the fasting of the mind, right, we people freak out. They call it the void. They call it there's all sorts of names for what that place is. Right? And what that place is the place of your natural residence, right? But the problem is that the mind has convinced you that its activity needs to be the theme music whenever you're involved. That rat-a-tat-tat happens. So we now know that mental rat-a-tat-tat is deemed as this is interesting. And when that mental rat-a-tat-tat subsides, this is boring, right? And a freak out arises because most folks live with that mental conversation. One of my favorite things is if you ever seen Family Guy, right? There's this one scene where Peter, he gets some wishes from a genie, and his wish is that he wants theme music. And you can just go YouTube it up. It's crack up because every time he starts to move, the theme music starts up, right? I mean, it's one of the most hilarious things you've ever seen. And if you can't see that this is akin to your mind chattering at you, right? The minute activity starts, the mind chatters, right? And a lot of times it chatters when you're not moving as well. So Peter actually had the luxury of when he was standing still, the theme music wasn't on, but most of us don't get that. But it was a really kind of a cute example of that. So 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 we're gonna go into that. We're gonna go into that in a minute because what the mind also does is that the more developed, complicated, sophisticated, use one of those words. In other words, the more parts and pieces that the mind has to carry, then that's deemed to be a sign of incredible high intelligence. So what gets lost in the whole thing? Simplicity, normalness, ordinariness. Right? Again, it used to be hilarious because what it takes to teach corporate leadership, I mean, there are all of these theories and graphs and tools that you give people and that's how that process is managed. And the simplicity of being is nowhere to be found. And yet it's in that simplicity that the possibility of the movement that leadership actually asks for might be found. Now, if you happen to walk in and you start to teach leadership from that place of simplicity, you will find yourself soon out of a job because the ones that they listen to are the ones that have these incredible mind constructions that they can explain and deliver because that impresses the mind, which impresses the people who have the minds. So, So that's what happens, right? So here's the last piece. Do you understand, concluded Maharaj, that objects and their attributes are not subject and object as perceived by the senses and interpreted by the mind, but that all are objects, including human beings, mere appearances in consciousness. And finally, therefore, objects cannot and need not be liberated. So the idea that you need liberation, that's the one you can park, right? You need to see through what you actually are, and in the seeing through, that liberation is awaiting because it always is. So that's the little piece from that. By the way, this is from pointers from Ramesh. So Ramesh would write these as he would write these after satsang in watching Maharaj work, and they're really well done. So any questions at this point? Comments, questions? All right, so we're gonna have a little fun now.
Well,
This
I just
is
want to make one comment. So
yeah,
this
yeah.
this word apprehension,
Apperception. Huh?
apperception.
Huh?
So the apperception cannot be done.
That's correct.
It can only happen.
That's correct.
And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Just like
That's correct. Yeah.
that.
Now what's interesting is that much like your enlightenment intensives, right?
Yes.
So it reframes what's happening. If you think about your enlightenment intensives or something that, I'll do the thing where you close your eyes and then you feel the perception behind you, right? Because that's that expansion.
Right.
Right? And then everybody would say, hey, look at that. Alan guided them into that. Or, hey, look at that. Joseph took these folks down. And basically what he did is he facilitated that all of this would happen. But when you see that consciousness is speaking to consciousness, and that in that speaking, there's an invitation to fall into what is, then that completely redefines what the activity looks like. There's no longer an assignment of Joseph's doing this. Joseph's just simply consciousness speaking to consciousness. And then, as a result of that speaking, right, there's a falling into what's available that's already been present all along.
Yeah, and it's not even me doing it when I lead those things.
That's correct.
It's the activity that they engage in that sometimes allows this opening to happen.
Yeah. And to them, they're going to say, I'm doing this most of the time, right? And so this is just a reframing of that and it's just what I was saying earlier about the traditional ways. It's like, well, you're going to assign it to an ego until you reach the place where you see that the ego is not in play, right? Then the conversation becomes much different, if you will. It can be done the way you and I just did it.
Yeah.
So that's all that's happening there, right? So once again, part of the confusion, Joseph, is that sense of presence, right? If the sense of presence is there, we equate that to I was there.
Mm.
If the doing is happening with the sense of presence, we equate that to I am doing the doing. Right. That's part of what you want to take a look at is to start to see that the presence has nothing to do with doing. It does, it's through you, but it's not you. That you are not the presence.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's how that one plays. All right. So we're gonna have fun with ordinary and normal today. So Osho loved telling stories about Mullah Nasruddin. Now, whether Nasruddin was an actual historical figure or simply a mythical Sufi device, hardly matters. He has survived for centuries because he embodies something seekers almost never expect to find in wisdom. Ordinariness, not holiness, not transcendence, not spiritual sophistication, ordinariness. And perhaps that is precisely why Osho loved him. The spiritual mind is constantly climbing. It wants higher states, deeper realizations, greater insights, more profound experiences. Go on to Facebook next time, and every time you see a spiritual thing, notice how many times they're going to get you to higher states, deeper realizations, greater insights, and more profound experiences. Right? That's what the spiritual mind wants. It imagines awakening as a summit somewhere above ordinary life. Nasruddin's entire function is to undermine that assumption. One of Osho's favorite stories goes like this. A man entered Nasruddin's shop and found him playing chess with a dog. The dog watched the board intently. When making a move, he would pick up the chess piece in his mouth, place it carefully on the board. Whenever he made a particularly good move, he wagged his tail enthusiastically, and occasionally he barked to indicate check. The visitor stood frozen in amazement. Finally, he managed to say, "That's an incredibly smart dog." Nasruddin looked at him and replied, "Not so smart. I've beaten him 3 times out of 5." Right? Just a normal dog playing chess with a dog. Why does this matter? Why would Osho spend years pointing to stories like this? Because wisdom is often hidden beneath the places the mind refuses to look. The mind wants to be extraordinary. Truth continually presents itself as ordinary. We're living in the age of what might be called the turbo mind. Everything moves faster, information arrives faster, opinions form faster, communication happens faster. The machinery of cognition has become extraordinarily efficient. Humanity has become remarkably good at processing. The mind is proud of this accomplishment. Then something unfortunate happens. A move inward begins. The seeker hears a teaching, a question appears, and intuition starts stirring. And the turbo mind comes along for the ride. The problem is that what it eventually encounters cannot be processed. It cannot be improved. It cannot be optimized. And it cannot even be understood in the conventional sense. The mind meets silence and calls it emptiness. The mind meets stillness and calls it boredom. The mind meets what Nisargadatta calls the I am and reports back that nothing much seems to be happening. This is one of the great surprises of the inward movement. The most fundamental thing turns out to be the least dramatic. Many years ago, developmental psychologists and mythologists borrowed a phrase from Joseph Campbell called the original myth. The idea was that every human being arrived with a unique patterning, a unique nature, before family, culture, religion, and society began shaping it. The work became recovering the original story beneath the conditioning. It was a useful movement, but it does not go far enough. Nisargadatta was not interested in recovering your original story. He was interested in exposing the fact that you are prior to all stories. Not your story before conditioning, not your authentic story, not your highest story, no story. The I am does not belong to anyone. It is not personal. It is not individual. It is the universal sense of being itself. The same light appearing through countless windows. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever, hold on one second, guys. So have you ever thought about how it actually works? That peering out of each set of eyes is the I am, the impersonal consciousness, right? So what seems to be looking through Alan's eyes is actually looking through all of the eyes, right? The same light appearing through countless windows. This becomes especially clear in chapter 49 of Pointers from Nisargadatta, the one we just did. Maharaj asked a room of seekers a simple question: what's the ultimate meaning of everything I have been teaching? The answers came immediately: liberation, freedom, release from suffering, enlightenment, awakening, the usual suspects. Maharaj laughed, not because the answers were wrong, because they revealed how persistent conditioning can be. Even spirituality had become another project, another acquisition, another achievement, another possession for the seeker. Maharaj pointed out that liberation and bondage belong to the realm of conceptual understanding. The deeper truth is far simpler. You are not an object seeking freedom. You are consciousness itself, and prior even to consciousness, pure awareness. Then Maharaj delivered one of those hammer blows only he could deliver. The body is merely food transformed. The essence of food, the product of nourishment, the growth of biological material. So he asked, which grain of food do you want to liberate? Yeah. This is where the annihilation of you begins, not the destruction of a real entity, the destruction of an assumption that some entity even ever existed. The seeker imagined, I am here, awakening is there, I must travel from one to the other. I remember vividly when I first got to the ashram, what is it that you want to do? And I said, well, from what I can understand, you guys are talking about enlightened. I want to become enlightened, right? So immediately what it got translated into was what the mistaken body mind of Alan wanted. Maharaj's teaching removes both ends of that equation. The seeker is the sought. The seeker, the presence of the seeker, which looks to be individuated, really isn't. It's simply a presence extruded into the body mind. That's all it is. The awareness doing the searching is the awareness being searched for. What remains after that realization is remarkably ordinary, which is exactly why seekers often miss it. The universal I am does not arrive dramatically. There are no trumpets, no fireworks, no cosmic confirmation email, no certificate of completion. It simply is quiet, present, and unmoving. Many seekers first encounter this simplicity and become disappointed. Where is the ecstasy? Where is the bliss? Where's the transcendence? Where's the thing I've been working for all these years? The disappointment is understandable. I want to stop right here and talk about sometimes when the witnessing occurs and a free sample, that awakening space arises, it really feels amazingly impactful. And I want you to understand all that is contrast. That's simply the moment that it's seen, it's contrast. So what happens after the first amazing free sample? The ego goes around and tries to find those free samples. And that's like being an addict where every dose that gets administered actually reduces in terms of its impact. It's because it's becoming normal. The contrast is no longer there. So if something happens and the event really feels amazingly impactful over duration, over time, it will settle into simply being. It will become the new normal, right? And the new normal is what the mind would call boring. So that's what we're after. So I just wanted to cover that in case anybody's had that moment and goes, wait a minute, Alan, I had that moment. It was pretty exciting. Yes. But remember, that's just the temporariness of contrast. That's all that's going on there.
That's very encouraging to hear.
Yeah. So, so yeah, it becomes, it does, it becomes just normal after a while, you know? So, so the turbo mind has spent its entire existence equating value with stimulation. More movement, more experience, more intensity. Then it encounters stillness and assumes something's gone wrong. Nothing has gone wrong. The mind has simply reached the edge of its jurisdiction, right? The void. This is exactly what Osho was pointing toward through Nasruddin. The descent into essence does not feel like ascent. It feels like coming home. The trouble is that home is so familiar, we overlook it. The seeker expects awakening to feel extraordinary. What remains after the annihilation of the seeker feels astonishingly normal. This is why watching becomes so important. Not effort, not analysis, not self-improvement, watching. The moment attention turns towards the activity of the mind itself, a subtle relaxation begins. Not because something has been achieved, because identification has loosened slightly. The machinery is still running, But now there is an awareness of the machinery, and awareness itself is not moving. So why does he call that the fasting of the mind? Because the mind thrives on separate pieces, assembling separate pieces, and the excitement of that rat-a-tat-tat. And when the mind encounters the silence, the reason it's fasting, there's no food there for the mind. It's simply not there. It has no choice but to fast. You've gone beyond the limits of where the mind can do what it needs to do. All right? So it's just like if you drive your Jeep to the edge of the trail and now you have to climb, and you find out that the damn Jeep wants to come with you. That's what the mind does. It drives you to the edge of the trail, and then it barks and complains because it's really boring the part that because it comes along for the rest of the hike sometimes until it enters the fasting. So just see that that's the case. That's where the boredom is. All right. All right. So here we go. The brilliance of the story. Um, he says this is where the second story comes in. I got ahead of myself. This is where the second Nasruddin story becomes useful. Abdul Rahman, it's really funny when Osho would tell these stories. I don't know why, but he really enjoyed putting the Sufis, and like his best friend was, had a Jewish name. So in the 1200s, when Mullah Nasruddin was roaming around, evidently there were, for some reason, Osho just loved to have Jewish friends for Nasruddin. So those were always involved. So Abdul Rahman, Rehman, was gravely ill. His friends took turns visiting him to keep his spirits up. Before Nasruddin entered, he was warned repeatedly because Nasruddin, would do what he did. Be careful. He is fragile. Don't say anything discouraging. Nasruddin entered and spent the evening telling funny stories. Everyone relaxed. Raymond laughed. The mood lightened. Then suddenly, Nasruddin became thoughtful. He began shaking his head. Raymond grew concerned. What is it? Nasruddin replied, I was just wondering how in the name of the holy prophet are they going to get a coffin down the crooked stairs in this house? The brilliance of the story is that Nasruddin simply says what everybody's already thinking. No spiritual performance, no artificial positivity, no carefully managed image, just honesty, ordinary honesty. And strangely enough, there's freedom in that. The seeker often attempts to become spiritual, elevated, detached, to become enlightened. Nasruddin never tries to become anything. He simply responds, and because he's not protecting an image, a naturalness emerges. Maharaj's annihilation of you points in exactly the same direction. The disappearance of the seeker does not create a superhuman being. It reveals what was already there before the seeker appeared, the ordinary, the normal, the natural. Awakening is often imagined as the acquisition of something extraordinary. More often it is the loss of one demand. More often it is the loss of one demanding extraordinary experiences. The turbo mind keeps insisting there must be more. There must be something higher. There must be a better state. Let it talk. It's always talked. Its commentary changes nothing. The silence beneath it remains untouched. The stillness remains untouched, and the awareness remains untouched. Maharaj described awakening as the complete absence of whatever can be imagined or cognized, a complicated way of saying something very simple. What you are cannot become an object of experience. It cannot be acquired. It cannot be improved. It cannot be achieved. It can only be recognized as the quiet background in which everything else appears. The mind calls this ordinary. Good, let it call it ordinary. The mind calls it boring. Fine, let it call it boring. The names do not change the reality. The ordinary is not an obstacle to awakening. The ordinary is what remains when the seeker exhausts himself. You are already in the place that needs no improvement, already in a place that requires no enhancement, already in the place the seeker has been trying to reach. The turbo mind cannot believe this. The seeker cannot accept it, which is precisely why Maharaj spoke of annihilation, not the annihilation of a real person, annihilation of the assumption that there was ever someone separate enough to become enlightened. And what remains? Nothing special. Just this, utterly ordinary, utterly normal, and quietly, unmistakably complete. So I chuckle just as an add-on because I go out and I see all of these folks that are spending all of this time to try to really work at making certain that their information remains confidential. Right? They don't want anybody to be able to. And I hear that and I always say to myself, man, you just call me. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Right? Like, what part of my story would you like to know? I'll be happy to tell you. Right? Because the management of who you are, once that drops, who cares? Now, I'm not saying that you should give them the numbers to your bank account, right? But at the same time, what is it that you'd like to know? And I really do like, the AI application of a lot of things because it seems to really be good at showing me things that I should buy that I just recently bought. So I'm not thinking it's very good at what it's doing, right? I bought a copier and all of a sudden I got asked for 52 copiers. I'm like, you know, so all I'm saying is this penetration into who you are, not as brilliant as you might think it, and that conversation can go a long way. But it's just simply the vulnerability itself dissolves because all vulnerability is the tenderness of who you are coupled with the image that you think you need to maintain. So you hide pieces, and when they're exposed, you feel vulnerable. But if there's no care about the pieces that are exposed, the tenderness is left. But its service in hiding pieces such that you don't feel vulnerable, what use is that? It simply dissolves. There isn't anything to be worried about. All right, that's my piece for today, everyone. It was good. It was good. So, did you guys like the Nasruddin stories? Did those work for you guys?
Loved them.
Yeah, good.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Dog playing chess. I'll definitely remember that one.
Yeah.
Free up that time.
Yeah. I've got, by the way, if I find a way, I've got a book with full of those. And if I find a way to somehow or another get those, I'll definitely get those to everybody. Right now, it would be scan every page, and I'm not sure I want to do that. But nonetheless, they're really great. But it's in the when the West began to embrace the the spiritual movement of the East, a lot of that was I mean, it started, to be fair, at the turn of the century, early 1900s, the World's Fair and all of but it really accelerated and became incredibly dense and present in the 60s when I was growing up. And in the embrace of that, it was made into an incredibly complicated or sophisticated space. That was what the embrace by the West did to that. So when somebody is in their own spiritual path, the part that they don't get typically from Western commentators is this sense of simplicity, right? That's not one of the deliverables in the East. The path that actually is being embraced and and transplanted in many ways to the Western consciousness, always included an amazing, amazing emphasis on the ordinariness of life. Right? Do you remember what's the Buddhist saying? Chop wood, carry water. Ordinariness, right? Ordinary. You keep seeing it over and over again. Well, that was a felt experience that was common in the path. Now you'll see it's no longer because of our conditioning in the West. That's a hard piece to keep in place, but that's one of the missing pieces in the path, the simplicity. And that's actually what's lovely. Joseph's going to be doing a lodge this weekend, right?
Yeah, a couple of days.
So think about the simplicity of, see, that's a way of introducing its physical, the simplicity of a lodge. It's real simple. So that's a reclaiming of that. Go ahead, Ron.
Now, I just wanted to add something that I think might contribute to this specialness that we've been inflicted with as seekers. Especially for those that have followed Eastern religion or Eastern philosophies, and how they're incorporated into the West. It's not necessarily that the Nisargadatas or Rameshes of the world or Ramanas of the world made themselves special, but the seekers made them special. And I think in that process, if anybody wanted to take the full path to enlightenment or awakening, then somehow they were going to have to arrive at a place where they were going to be just as special. And I think I certainly was afflicted with that, thinking along the way that, oh, I'm going to have this experience and somehow I'm going to be special. And the ordinariness just can't exist in that perception of being special. It just says they don't go hand in hand. And personally, falling into the ordinariness, you described everything I've been through, and you know what I've been through. So, but anyway, that specialness, and one of the attributes that Alan has, if I may say, Alan, when I first met him, never exuded any specialness ever. And it was such a breath of fresh air to find that authenticity rather than some of the egoic teachers I have stumbled across in my time. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that for whatever it's worth.
It's just to kind of take what you said and move just a little bit with it. There's that famous saying when Buddha says, "When you meet me in the road, kill me." Now, I want you to know it's really interesting because being in India is really an experience because you see how teachings land. And then you come back to the West and you see how teachings land. That one really gets folks in the West very upset. You know, in the East, it's just kind of, oh, of course, right? When you would that was just I sure gotcha. I thank you for the reminder, as opposed to the West where it's like, holy shit, what do you mean kill you? Right. So remember grace, gratefulness is just an emergent, an emergent sense. It doesn't need to be hooked or applied to anyone. And so all Buddha was saying was, if you've hooked it onto me, kill me, and the attachment will go away.
And that specialness gets lost in the ordinariness. It's like in the ordinariness, there's just no way to feel special.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels like such a relief too.
Yeah.
You know,
So it's easy to say whatever I've made Buddha to be, I'm willing to give that one up, right? That's how you kill him, right? I'm willing to give that whatever it is I've made Buddha out to be, no problem, gone. And then the possibility of Buddha landing, so to speak, becomes a much different exercise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Alan, I had an experience today that was just revealing for me. And I'll start by telling you a Mullah Nasruddin story first. So I got, as we were talking about earlier in the day, I kind of got a little obsessed with reading about Mullah Nasruddin, and so I came across a story which was Mullah Nasruddin is sitting there under a lamppost looking at the ground, you know, and these passersby come around and they say, "Well, what's going on? What are you looking for?" And he says, "Well, I've lost my keys." And they say, "Well, did you lose them right here?" And he goes, "No, but the light is better."
Yeah. One of my favorites, by the way. So in Awakened Leadership, that story appears.
Okay,
One of my
so
one of my absolute favorites. Yeah, the light's better. That, of course, is where I'm looking.
so two things to add to this was we have this really great health club in this city where I live. So they've got, steam room and sauna and all of that stuff. And as you know, I sit behind the desk all day long. So the steam room's really good for me. So I'm in there and I'm kind of moaning because my shoulder was hurting or whatever. And there's this kid sitting not moaning, but it's pretty sore. And this kid was sitting next to me and he said, "Oh, are you sore?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been writing all day." And so he starts asking me about it. And I tell him, "Well, I'm working on a meditation manual," and so on and so forth. And anyway, he starts asking me these really pointed questions about meditation. And he was smart enough that I could kind of engage him with some of this material. So I went down the rabbit hole with him. And at the end of it, he asked me if I had any advice for him about meditation. So I just gave, my teacher, the two major pointers my teacher will give is, the Saguna method would be just become aware of your entire body. And then the Nirguna method, he uses I am, I know I am, right? So anyway, so I just told the kid, well, just, throughout the day, if you find yourself lost in thought, become aware of your body. So then I knew he was a Christian. So at the end of it, he gives me this was all very nice, but welcome to the world of Jesus Christ type of story. You know what I mean? Like, my advice to you, whether you want it or not, I don't know what you're seeking. Anyway, the point of this is he says to me, "I don't know what you're seeking." And I was very nice and I just smiled and, I thank you so much for the advice. But what was revealing to me was two things. One, he was just looking where the light was good.
Right.
Second, when he said, "What are you seeking?" without thinking about it, I just thought, I'm not seeking anything. I already know.
Yeah.
But that was a really deep, that for me, that was, I think, the first moment I realized I'm not seeking anything anymore.
Well, and the beauty of that, having been a Mormon missionary in my early life, I can tell you that all Christianity, if you look at the essence of its story, is about somebody seeking something.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Right. So when you flip, so if you decide that that's the true thing, that's the true religion, then everybody must belong in that box. So whatever you're seeking, because obviously everybody is seeking something. And I've always found that really an incredibly suffocating assumption because it's tough to get out of that one. It really is.
Well, I realized I was playing chess with the dog, so I said, it's time for me to go
3 out of 5. I love it.
Anyway.
Love it. All right. Anything else, everybody?
No, it's been a great hour, and I just loved what you had to say about the the free samples, the witnessing, how the contrast when that first
Yes.
starts to happen the first time, the first few times, it's like an aha lightning bolt, oh my God, kind of a thing. And I've experienced that where I've been in the witness state for a few minutes, an hour or two, oh my God. And I think like in the way back of my mind, I feel almost like I'm balancing like a dinner plate on my finger, trying to keep it. Oh, it's going away, it's going away. Oh. And then a few months after that, 2, 3 months later, I find that I think that I may have been in the witness state, but I wasn't really sure. And I think probably I was, but that the contrast is not there what it was now, that's
That's
becoming a
right.
little bit more and more normalized. So that
Yep.
that high that I was on is kind of like come down to earth a little bit. More simple, you know?
And you can see that in other areas too. Think about how relationships work, the high of the beginning of the relationship, and then it turns into a real relationship, and it's just
Yeah,
nowhere.
definitely.
So what you do is you say, well, screw this. I'm going to get rid of this one. And you go find another relationship and it goes through the same thing. And
Right.
so pretty soon you're kind of like, wait a minute, I've seen a pattern here. You know, so that contrast works in every experience, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway. All right. All right, everybody. Well, it was fun. I had a fun time. I don't know what we're going to do next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it's
Thanks,
just I just want you to know it's lovely to be able to do this with everyone. It was a beautiful day today, and this has really become an incredible experience for me because my Thursdays now are about this, and it's really lovely. So
It
anyway,
really is.
yep.
We
And
appreciate it.
all right, man. I'll
Absolutely.
see everybody next week.
Great. Thanks a
Have a great
lot.
night, guys. Take care.
Bye.